And as Cameron was on stage for about, I think it was about 56 minutes, I sat like this. Yeah, that's, all of it makes sense. When you hear it, you think, of course. Cameron is the founder of Authentic Jobs. It's going into its 8th year, recent anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's an awesome milestone to be having. He's also been a renowned designer, author, and speaker on mobile and design at numerous conferences. I'd especially note that since I met him earlier this year, every interaction I've had with Cameron has been really insightful, smart, and he exudes more positivity than almost anybody else I know. It's really, really fun to talk to him, which makes me very happy to have him here tonight with us. So please let me give warm, yes, please welcome Cameron Moll.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. No pressure after all of that, right? So this presentation will be positive and a bit of smackdown as well to kind of reset our expectations about what mobile is and is not. So I've been speaking for about 8 years now, and it's been wonderful. I've had a great time speaking at all kinds of places, never here at Etsy. And this is amazing to be here. I appreciate you guys bringing me out. But in 2014, I'm not going to speak at all. It's time for me to take a sabbatical of sorts and take a rest. So I only have about, I think, tonight and then 2 more speaking gigs the rest of the year, and then I'm done for a while. So one of my go-to slides for the last few weeks has been the one I'll show you here in just a second, just because it's fun. And I gotta do it a couple more times because I only have 2 times left after this. And I wish I'd known this was going to be widescreen because this is a movie. So we're going to start off with a movie. I figured that'd be a good way to kick things off tonight, right? Warm things up a bit. So here we go. This does have audio, by the way. Let's see if we can get this to work. Yeah. How many of you heard that before? I think that you do a search on YouTube for flute version of the 20th century. That wasn't a flute, though. That's like a recorder. All right, so this is a real video this time. I promise this is a real video. I just got done presenting at Brooklyn Beta. And at Brooklyn Beta, unveiled a project that I've been working on for 3 years that has nothing to do with cross-screen experiences. But I figure we're at Etsy. This is all about handcrafted stuff. So I want to show you a handcrafted piece of mine that was launched just a few hours ago today. And then we'll get into all the cross-screen stuff. But again, we're at Etsy. We've got to talk about handcrafted stuff. There's a letterpress right there, which is related to what you're about to see. How appropriate. So here we go. Hey Kickstarter, how about I raise money for these classes?
My name is Cameron, and I reimagine buildings as if designed entirely with type. I've completed a couple of these already, first with the Obvious Temple in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a second at the Colosseum in Rome. And now with your help, I'll complete one of the most challenging pieces yet, the Brooklyn Bridge. I began studying the Brooklyn Bridge 3 years ago, and I had no idea it would be even more challenging than the first 2 pieces. What makes it so challenging is the fact that it's so expansive. A side perspective would make it impossible to show off all of the features that make it so iconic. So after photographing the bridge from both sides of the East River, I settled on this perspective, which allows me to capture the entire bridge, but closer up. Typeface selection, as you can imagine, is critical to a project like this. So I turned to a friend of mine, Jonathan Heffler, and he pointed me to the Bound & Company Museum on Water Street, run by Robert Warner. When I first met Robert, he showed me a specimen book of woodblock typefaces that would have been in use around the time the bridge was being built. And I immediately fell in love with one of them, Antique Triple Extra Condensed. That's the one at the bottom you see there. John Rosen, the chief architect of the bridge, was born in Germany. So I selected another typeface called Fettigottisch, designed in Germany, also around the same time as the bridge. And hidden throughout the artwork are the names of John Rosen, his son Washington, who would take over as chief engineer, and lots of other hidden texts, like the last names of those who died during construction. Only a few portions of the artwork remain to be completed, and then I tackle the most important challenge yet, and this is where you come in. I need your help to fund the extensive printing process that lies ahead. Colors for this piece have been carefully selected to match the granite and limestone used to construct the bridge. Now that's actually me on the bridge with a Pantone book. Assuming we can pull it off because everything fits so tightly, we'll print this piece with 2 colors instead of 1. Bryce Venezia of One Press in Provo, Utah will handle the printing just as he's done with the first 2, and if anyone can pull it off, it's Bryce. He's as nuts about details as I am. So I'll be thrilled if you back this project. And if you back this project at $80 or more, you'll get one of the first copies of this limited edition artwork, never to be printed again.
Oh boy, this is going to take all night. Good thing the lights come on the bridge, if it does. Hey Kickstarter, I need your help turning Brooklyn Bridge into a letterpress poster designed entirely with type. So the last part was filmed, I think, last year. Thank you, thank you. That last part was filmed, I think, last year when I came out for another conference, and I just could not get it right. And I said forget about it and figured I'd throw it in there. So that's up on Kickstarter now. It was launched just about 4 hours ago, I think. If you'd like to learn more about that project, you can go to this address. That will basically redirect you to Kickstarter. And I've got more photographs and other things on there about the print. So that's something I do on the side. My full-time job is running Authentic Jobs, but this is something I love getting my hands dirty with on the side. So let me back up, tell you a little bit about me. Just a very short history. I was born at a young age. I grew a little bit older, and then I built a website, and that's kind of the extent of my history up to this point. Now, Authentic Jobs, as I mentioned, is what I do full-time. This is a job board targeted at web designers, web professionals, copywriters, things like that. How many of you in here would classify yourself as designer, by show of hands? How about developer? How about something other than those 2 categories? Okay, good. This is great. So I have 4 children. They keep me busy. We got lucky with this photograph in DC. We just paused for something. I can't remember what. And I posed for it. And then, as I mentioned in that video, you can see some of the other stuff I've worked on. I live in Sarasota, Florida, by the way. This is our beach. Beautiful beach. Wonderful beach. And that brings us to what we're talking about today, the cross-screen experience. So pitfalls, traps to avoid, but also successes, victories that others have had that we can have of designing these cross-screen experiences. Now, if we look at any given city at any given time, there are likely to be a pretty wide variety of users. Did we lose the connection on this? Getting all fuzzy again? Ooh, that's not good. Retro, is that what you said? Something like that? Mike, you're going to have to hold this the whole time, I'm telling you. All right, we'll have to deal with that. So you might have people, they're on break, standing on a street corner, killing time in a taxi. And the question we'll naturally ask as part of this is, what device are they using? Well, I have started to wonder, that is, does it really matter? Or matter as much as we have thought that it matters? Because I think in the past few years, with the rise of responsive web design, we've become accustomed to trying to define the user experience in terms of just 3 categories, right? Desktop, mobile, and tablet. And I tried to do this sort of thing with a book I wrote, I think I have a copy here somewhere, in 2007, 6 years ago, called Mobile Web Design. That's terribly dated now. It was self-published at the time, and it was written on the premise that mobile devices were on the cusp of becoming widely used for more than just placing phone calls and texting and things like that. And so therefore, the web on a mobile device deserved a different experience than the other web, so to speak. And I knew of, and still today I'm very cognizant of this ideal one web, that there is only one web out there and we designed for that one web. But I also realized that there was a need for a practical approach until we got to that ideal, which I think we're still searching for. Now, oh, how the industry has changed since then. I published this book 1 month after iPhone came out and managed to sneak in just a couple screenshots of iPhone at the time, and think of everything that's come out since then. Now, in hindsight, there wasn't a mobile web in 2007. There is not a mobile web today in 2013, but we still refer to things like the mobile web. And now we have things like the tablet web. And what about the wearables web and the other things, the car web and the fridge web, and the other things that are coming down the pike? And I wonder if we're still kind of shoehorning our experiences into mobile and tablet and so forth. Well, what does mobile actually mean anyway? Is this mobile? This is the Galaxy Note 8. It's either the world's largest phone, it's got an 8-inch screen, or it's a tablet that also happens to be a phone. So when you talk on this thing, it looks like this. Hello. Is this mobile? Is this tablet? I mean, how do we classify this thing? Is this a laptop? How about this? This is the Acer DA220 HQL. I know that's an incredibly sexy name for a product. This is a touchscreen, 21.5 inches, and it runs Android 4.0. So how do we classify this thing? Is this a desktop, a PC? Is it a tabletop? How about this? You might have heard of this Ubuntu Edge project. It was a phone. The idea was to fund this phone that you could plug into any display with an HDMI connection. It was unsuccessfully funded. I don't know if that was because they had a $32 million funding goal, or if we're just not ready for something like this. We just can't make it up in our minds that I have a mobile device that can act as a computer, and that's the idea, that it would act like a fully functional PC. What about mobility? Mobile as a verb instead of a noun. Is this mobile? Well, he's on the go. We'd probably say, yeah, we'd classify that as mobile. But how about this guy? Is this mobile? He's on a mobile phone, but he's seated in his office. You know, Google commissioned a study not too long ago, and they found that 77% of what we call mobile searches happen at home or at work. So is that really being mobile, or mobility, the verb mobile? How about this? Is this mobile? She's on a tablet. Is this the tablet web? How do we refer to this activity? Or something like this. How do we define that kind of activity? Now, this is a stat from, I think, about a year ago, so we can trust that the stat is even higher today. But we basically can say at least 1/3 of US adults now own a tablet. And what's amazing about that is this category really didn't even exist 3 years ago. And now we're talking about 1/3 of all adults in the US having a tablet. And I think it's much higher than that today, in fact. You might have seen this photograph taken in 2005 in St. Peter's Square at the announcement of the new Pope. 8 years later, this is that same setting. Isn't that crazy? That's the world we live in, though, right? This is the Tesla Model S. Would we define this as mobile? Inside it, it has a ginormous touchscreen display. That's how big it is. It's about this big in real life. It runs off the Qt browser. It's based on WebKit. This is Luke W., who got in one of these and took a screenshot of his site on that, and you can see the entire thing. Now, they've got a split where you have the energy consumption down in the bottom, but that's the whole browser portion up there in the top. So how do we define this thing, right? Is this a noun? Is it a verb? What about this idea of our society having screens everywhere? What's to be said of that? Well, Chris Ziegler said this. He said, I don't want a web browser in my car. More importantly, I don't want the drivers around me to have a web browser. And then you have things like this. This is the Samsung, I don't know the model numbers, 28 cubic foot fridge. It sells for $3,700, and it's got this nice screen on the front of it. And it has really impressive reviews. People are talking about you can see the weather, you can listen to Pandora while cooking. I think it has speakers built into it too. You can display the family photos from Picasa. Well, I think by now it's obvious that the point I'm trying to make is that it's not so easy to frame our discussions by device or even by context. But we like to try to do that, don't we? Mobile, tablet, desktop, and so forth. And I think Brad Frost, who has spoken at this very series back in March or something like that, said this. He said, we don't know what will be underneath Christmas trees 2 years from now, but that's what we need to design for today. And given the fact that it can take 2 years from idea to launch, we should start thinking about right now what's going to be under the Christmas tree in 2015 or something to that effect. Our world, it really is changing right before our eyes. This photograph perfectly describes that. This is, I think what's happening here is this is a transfer of power. This is taken in Qatar from father to son, and that might be father taking the photograph or someone else capturing this moment. And I think that perfectly defines how global this world is and using devices that go way beyond a desktop or a PC or things like that. And some of the most adept at embracing screens and devices and things like that are children. My sons sent me a few screens from FIFA. They play FIFA a lot, and they played on iPad, they played on Xbox, and Wii, and on their iPod Touch. And to them, this is just another window into that experience. They don't really care a great deal about the device. It's more about the accessibility, being able to get to that thing, using it on the go, doing it at home, or those kinds of things. Now, our industry, I would like to think that our industry, meaning the web industry, has special claim to this idea of talking about cross-screen experiences and multi-screen experiences, but we're not the only one. This is a talk. I'm going to show you just a minute-and-a-half segment from a talk given by Kevin Spacey at the Edinburgh International Television Festival. He's describing the success of House of Cards and how it's bucking the notion of kind of film and TV and other platform labels that we've grown accustomed to using in recent decades. And he says it way better than I can say it. This is phenomenal. Here we go.
So I predict that in the next decade or two, any differentiation between these platforms will fall away. Is 13 hours watched as one cinematic whole really any different than a film? Do we define film as being something 2 hours or less? Surely it goes deeper than that. If you're watching a film on your television, is it no longer a film because you're not watching it? Except perhaps to agents and managers and lawyers. Up now, there's no difference. Watching Avatar on an iPad, or watching YouTube on a TV, or watching Game of Thrones on their story. And the audience, they want. And they will talk about it, binge on it, carry it with them on the bus and to the hairdresser, force it on their friends, tweet, blog, Facebook, make fan pages, silly gifs, and God knows what else about it. Engage with it with a passion and an intimacy that a blockbuster movie could only dream of. All we have to do is give it to them.
Isn't that great? Same idea, right? We could replace content, as he was saying there, with experiences. The onus is on us to deliver experiences to our consumers, our customers, however and whenever they want them, and take advantage of that. There's a lot of great things happening out there. MailChimp. This was published just a few weeks ago, and they're saying, this is just a page talking about how now they're embracing devices and things like that. And look at the wording used here. The new generation of MailChimp adapts to your workflow, regardless of the device you're using and the size of your team. A cohesive experience across desktop and mobile devices means you can create, send, and track email campaigns in any context. So it doesn't matter if you're on a mobile device, a tablet, whatever. You can start on one device, pick up on another, track your campaigns on tablet, and so forth. Have you run into this dilemma yet? When you're writing copy, you're talking to customers, is it tap? Is it click? How do you talk to customers? You need to go blank this button, this label, whatever. There's been some arguments about this recently that some have said that select, maybe we should be saying select, that's the right word. And Andy Clark argues that press is the right word because in his words, whether the input type is physical or virtual, that's typically what people do. So maybe there's something to be said of saying we select things rather than tap or click. Now, while doing research for this presentation, I'd remembered this quote from Coca-Cola Company that one of my professors said in college, and I was trying to dig that up related to this presentation and ended up finding this fascinating story about how this iconic glass contour bottle came about. And what happened was I think it was in the 1920s, Coca-Cola Company was facing an influx of copycat beverages. And so in defense of their brand, they issued this call for design entries. And they had just one unique requirement. The bottle had to be recognizable in the dark. So if you picked up a bottle of Coke, you would know that it was a bottle of Coke in the dark. And that's where that contour bottle came from. Now, it was also heavily influenced on designs in nature, specifically the gourd-shaped cocoa pod like you can see here. But the idea was that if you grabbed this thing and it was really dark, you knew that that was an authentic Coca-Cola. Now, I wrote about this on my website. You can go read about it and how these kinds of constraints saying, oh, it has to be recognizable in the dark can lead to some amazing things happening. But the quote I was after is this: within arm's reach. This was from Robert Woodruff. This was his vision for Coca-Cola Company, that there would be a Coke within arm's reach of everybody in the entire world. Now, Robert Woodruff served as Coca-Cola Company, I think, for roughly 3 decades. And the reason I was searching for this quote was because I felt we have the same opportunity as an industry to embrace that same kind of thinking. Here's the idea. Maybe you followed this conversation that was taking place not too long ago, where people were saying the best interface is no interface. That sounds reasoning, but do we really believe that? Is that really the case? I argue instead that the best interface is the one that's within reach. And you can now see why I was looking for that quote from Robert Woodruff. So it might be the phone in our pocket. It might be the iPad on our nightstand. It might be this desktop computer or laptop, that is, and things like that. Whatever's nearest to us sometimes. Jeremy Lockhorn said this: forget mobile, let's think multi-screen. I think we need to do more of this, talking about multi-screen rather than just mobile, tablet, and so forth. So my remarks today are yes, Cameron as the speaker up here, conveying my knowledge and experience to you. I don't know everything. If we combine the collective knowledge of all of us in this room, it would be phenomenal to have that discussion. But I want to also share the user side of me, of Cameron, and what delights me as a user, and you, what delights you as a user. Imagine a conference. I don't know if you go to conferences and have the opportunity to hear speakers speak, but imagine a conference where all of the speakers were users, and we got to sit back and just listen to how people use our stuff. I think that would be an amazing event to go to, and I want to do that for just a second. If you'll bear with me, let me talk about Cameron as the user, not Cameron the speaker. So here we go. These are the 5 devices that I use most every day, and if we frame my usage in terms of how I interact with those devices, it's really through their screens. So my window to the web is merely a series of screens of different sizes, and in some cases, different capabilities based on the devices behind those screens. Now, we could chart my usage of these screens over a 24-hour period, and it might look something like this, where we have morning, midday, and night, and then we have the devices there on the side, and you can see that maybe I use the devices, and this is actually pretty accurate about how I use the devices, where you've got my iPad usage most in the morning, at lunch, at evening. This is my desktop computer there at the top that I'm using during the workday, and so forth. And so at any given point, I have anywhere from 2 to 5 screens that might be in use as you look at the variety of instances of my day. Now, what if there were a bar for a car, if I had a touch screen in my car, or fridge, or things like that? And these arrows really do extend both directions. I don't know if you've been like me, but there have been times where I've been sick at 2 a.m. in the morning and didn't have anything else to do, and so I grabbed my phone and browsed the web or something to that effect. And so it really does go both ends of the spectrum. Now, I think there are at least 5 ways to categorize these experiences, these cross-screen experiences specifically, that we and other users have every day. And there are these 5. And we're going to talk about these just briefly, very briefly. We don't have a lot of time, unfortunately. So I'll just touch on these, and then I'm going to give you a series of do's and don'ts to think about when designing for these kinds of categories. So number 1, discrete. This is basically saying that this is where you have an experience on one screen that is completely independent of, but could be cohesive with, experiences on other screens. And this has largely been our approach to date, where we look at making the best experience possible on desktop, and that's it. Best experience possible on mobile. And now we're starting to look at both of those things working together. So Twitter.com for me is a great example of this. I use the website more than any other app, and I think it just works beautifully well, more so than any other app, desktop or phone that I've used. NPR, another great experience. I don't consume NPR's content any other way than through the NPR app on my phone. I drive a 1988 Jeep Cherokee. It has 260,000 miles on it, and I'm going to drive it until it has nothing left. And so the radio is not very good in it, but I plug this thing into my radio, and I can listen to NPR content through that app. And it's a great experience. This discrete experience for me is beautiful. I love it. Sequential, this is where you have an experience that's capable of flowing from one screen to another. And for me, this epitomizes this idea of cross-screen experiences, the ability to traverse from screen to screen, to pick up where you left off, to continue an activity, and things like that. Amazon, in my opinion, is the archetype of great cross-screen experiences. I spend upwards of probably $20,000 a year, both business and personal, through Amazon, because many of the purchases that we would make around town or that I might make for business and electronics go through Amazon, because they do just such a phenomenal job of that. And I've done this many, many, many times, where I add an item to my cart on the desktop, and I might finish that up later on my iPad in bed, or vice versa, or I'm traveling, or whatever it might be. I do this all the time, and it just works. I can put something in my cart on my phone, get to my computer at work, and there it is in my cart, and boom, I make the purchase, and I'm done. And all of my data is there, and so forth. Now, the folks at Google did another study, and they found out that 67% of users who have access to more than one screen, meaning they have 2 or more devices, 67% of those people use multiple screens sequentially for online shopping, just online shopping. And fully 90% use sequential tasking for online activities in general. So if we look not just at shopping, but searching, browsing, news, social media, and so forth, 90% of people who have 2 screens or more will do this very thing, where they traverse and go from one experience to the next. My morning routine every day, except for Sunday, that's kind of my day of rest from media for the most part. I sit down at the breakfast table with Flipboard. I've got my bowl of cereal there, and I spend about 30 minutes flipping through news and tweets and so on and so forth. And I might find something that's interesting, and what I typically will do is this. It's going to sound silly. I will typically click on that little leg, click email, the link, and then I send that to myself. And later when I get to my desktop, I might tweet about that thing that I read at breakfast or something of that sort. Does anybody else do this? Email links to yourself? Okay, that's good. Because we're not alone. Look at this. Up to 49% of these multi-screen users email themselves a link for continuing an activity on another device. Now it says up to 49% because it varies on the activity. It's lower and higher based on what they're doing, whether they're searching, browsing, etc. But the point is nearly half of all multi-device users do this very thing. Now when I first updated my phone to iOS 7 just a few weeks ago, one of the very first apps I had to use, and I had to use it, was called JotNot Pro. And it allows me to capture a document, and it will then turn that document into a PDF, or I can basically fax that document. I can't believe I said that. But I can basically fax that or send it to myself and something like that. And so I got in the app. I took a photo of this document. I don't remember what it was. And then I went through the motions of emailing this to myself, and I got to this screen. And specifically this feature, I'm like, holy cow. And I'm thinking in my mind, no way, they built this into iOS 7. This is amazing, because this was literally one of the first apps I used, and I thought they baked this into iOS 7. This is phenomenal. They must have heard me speak, or something like that. It turned out that's not the case. It was just this app. There may be other apps out there. This is the only one I've encountered so far that does this very thing, and I'm like, man, how perfect, because I do this all the time, especially with this app, but also many other apps as well. Complementary. This is an experience complemented by a device's unique capabilities. So a simple example of this might be a barcode scanner, right? So you use your iPhone to basically act as kind of a pseudo barcode scanner. Another example would be Day One. Anyone in here use Day One? It's a great journaling app built by a good friend of mine, Paul Main. It was named Apple's best app of the year in 2012, not just of a specific category, but across the board, because it works on iPhone, iPad, and so forth. And in a previous version, you could start an entry on your desktop, and then you could go continue that entry or edit that entry on iPhone, for example. And you can see down at the bottom, you can add, or it would add for you, data about when that was written, the temperature, the location, and so forth. Now, Paul just updated it, just a few days ago, and now the desktop will also sniff out that same information. And so now they share that data. But basically, the iPhone app was a complement to what I was doing on the desktop. Google Maps, another great example, right? When you're driving, you can set that up to have audio directions. That's a complement that goes beyond a more static experience on the desktop and it deals with the context of driving and needing to know where you go. An extensional experience is an experience that controls or is controlled by another experience. So one example might be if you have an Apple TV and you have the remote app on your iPhone, you can control the input and navigation on Apple TV and so forth. There are a lot of examples for Android and so forth. I'm sorry that I'm using mostly Apple experiences. That's mostly my world. I know that there are many things similar on Androids and so forth. And I have a lot of devices at home for testing that allow me to peer into Android and do Google Chromecast and things like that. But anyways, that's one example. Another one might be this, and I think we're all familiar with this, where we can post a photo to Instagram, but then extend that posting somewhere else to Facebook and so on and so forth. And here I did that with one of these. You get the idea. And then finally, simultaneous. This is where we're kind of multiple screens happening at the same time. Most obvious example is watching TV and tweeting about the game or something like that. We're not going to dive into that, but we simply don't have time to go into the details of all these. So let me just give you a few do's and don'ts when we're thinking about these 5 categories of designing for cross-screen experiences. Number 1, don't stereotype devices or their owners for that matter. So one of the Google studies that I've been referencing here is a terrific resource, but I think they've mistakenly attempted to frame the usage of common devices with these stereotypical activities. And so in one of these pages of this report, they talk about the PC or laptop computers, and look at how they frame it. The context is you're at the office or home use, productive, requires lots of time, serious research, intensive attitude, and so forth. And then for smartphones, they frame it as you're on the go, short bursts of time, need info quickly, and immediately, and boom, you're done. Is that really how we use all of our devices? I think this is the trap we fall into when we stereotype not just devices, but their owners as well. The title of this presentation was a very conscious decision, the cross-screen experience, not the cross-device experience, because it really is another window for our users rather than saying, oh, they're on mobile, and so we have to serve them a mobile-friendly experience. To them, it's not necessarily mobile. It is another screen into your world, your experience that you're providing for them. And I think thinking about screens helps us eliminate another don't, and this is the other don't. Don't fall prey to the convenience of device silos. I think it's important to have starting points like talking about mobile first, responsive design, touch first. Things like progressive enhancement are critical to creating great cross-screen experiences. But at the same time, I think we're seeing the convergence of those experiences coming together, and those stereotypes are breaking down. So if we have something like this, we might traditionally talk about screens like this, that on the left you have limited data, slower connections on the go, and then on the right, unlimited data. Do these labels really match how we use these devices and their screens? What if it looks more like this, the convergence that has been happening and will continue to happen, where those things are shared across the spectrum? And what happens when we add, again, into the picture wearables, car screens, and so on and so forth? Numerous times I've caught myself, after using my iPad, I will go to my MacBook Air and I reach for the screen to tap or press on the screen because I'm in that mindset of I just can do that. So what happens when something like this comes out? Or Leap Motion, where the interface is how wide our arms can reach. This is a great device. I have one of these. I think it's a bit ahead of its time, and we haven't figured out how to practically use it. I don't know if you remember Jeff Hahn when he was showing stuff at TED 2005-ish, where he showed these big touchscreen tables, and you could pan and zoom. It was totally revolutionary at the time, but it was a bit ahead of his time, and we hadn't figured out how to use that practically. That is, of course, until iPhone came along, and then we saw touching and panning and zooming and pinching and all of those things. So back to avoiding stereotypes and silos. I love discussions like this. This is one that took place on Dribbble, where they're asking, hey, how do you name your media queries? And some people are saying, well, instead of saying mobile, tablet, desktop, I use names like Little Bow Wow, Eminem, and Jay-Z, or Young Cruston, Old Cruston, Elder Cruston. And somebody mentioned, oh, I use the names of the Jackson 5 to help them think about. And the point was being, the discussion was, we're getting ourselves out of those silos to think about vague terms that allow us to think, oh, okay, small, big, maybe something in between, and so on and so forth. Let me share one example of how we've made this mistake of siloing with Authentic Jobs. If you visit Authentic Jobs with a large screen, it doesn't matter if it's a tablet or a desktop, as long as it's wide enough, the viewport is wide enough, you cannot search for jobs closest to you without having to physically type something in. But I'll teach you a trick. If you resize the browser to a smaller width, you can use that nifty little Locate Me button, and boom, you're done. And then you can stretch it back out and go on your way. And our thinking was, well, nobody wants to do that on a desktop. This is perfect for tablets, and it's semi-supported on desktop and so forth. But by siloing by those experiences, we missed a key opportunity. We still haven't fixed it today to embrace those browsers that can do that sort of thing and make it very easy and fast for people to find jobs in their area. All right, here's a do. Do sequence tasks across screens to the extent possible, especially those that require revision and contemplation. So I mentioned Amazon, right? This is a great example of sequential cross-screen tasking. Zappos, I love Zappos, but I think the experience can be improved just a little bit. Now, the examples I'm using, all of them in this presentation today, I love these sites. I think they could be a little bit better if they improve a couple things. Zappos is one of those. So if I have an item in my cart, let's say on my laptop, and I'm signed in, it doesn't carry over to a small screen. So if I go to a mobile device and sign in, it's not there. Now, I kid you not, I was working on this presentation, and I had some stuff in my cart, and an email came in saying, hey, your cart needs some love. So I picked it up, it was on my phone, took the bait, clicked. Now, the first thing it did was it said, oh, by the way, you need to download our app before we send you onto your cart. And then when I finally got there, it said, hey, your cart's empty. And the reason was because I had added this product to my cart on the desktop. It sent me an email. I checked that email on my phone, clicked over to my cart, and it wasn't there. And again, I was signed in, but it still wasn't there. Twitter, I love Twitter. I think they could be a little bit better. If I'm writing something on Twitter, there's this nice draft feature on my phone, for example. You don't get that on the desktop. So if I draft something there, it doesn't carry over. And you might say, why in the world would you need to do that? It's 140 characters, Cameron. You just retype it. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to do this, though, because with some of my tweets, I'm thinking heavily about the wording of these tweets, or I might have grabbed a link from someone else, and I don't want to have to go dig and search for that again on my desktop if I'm still revising that tweet and so on. Do respect users' mental models aesthetically and functionally. And I say respect, not protect. In other words, just be aware of those mental models, and to the extent that aesthetics and function should map to those models, make it happen. So with Gmail, you have this visual pattern that's been around for many years. These stacked emails, they can be minimized, they can be expanded, and that maps over to what you experience on a tablet, for example. And they've been doing this for a very long time. This is a screenshot that I took for this book in 2007 on a Nokia smartphone, a 6680, I think it was. And look, you can still see that mental model is mapping over from what the desktop was back then. I mentioned Flipboard. I love Flipboard. Here's an example of where this ignores my mental model. So on iPad, you swipe horizontally to go through things. What do you do on iPhone or on a tablet? Watch. Nope, sorry. You swipe up. This throws me off every time. I'm swiping left to right on iPad. I go to my phone, try to do that, and it brings out some settings menu. I'm like, why in the world did you do that? Maybe there's some good reasons for that, but it confuses me. And I guess I'm not the only one who's thrown off by this whole idea of the horizontal versus vertical and so forth. Previous version of iOS, I would update things on my phone, and then I'd go to do that on iPad, and I'm like, where in the world did the Update All button go? Forgetting that it's up there in the upper left corner. And again, I guess I'm not the only one thrown off by this kind of thing. I mentioned earlier, well, we saw that example of Zappos where they kind of forced that you need to download our app on us. Dictionary.com, I love Dictionary.com. I think there are some great things with it. As I'm using and going around the site, clicking into things, checking out words and so forth, multiple times I'm informed I need to go download their app. I find it ironic that the name of the site is Dictionary.com, and yet they're trying to push me out into an app experience. I mean, it really is a browser, for the love of Pete, so just let them use it. Now, to their credit, they have an app in the store, I think both an Android and iPhone, or excuse me, Apple, and it's a highly rated app. That's not always the case, though. I love this tweet from Greg Hoy, a good friend of mine. I could favorite this a dozen times if I could. He says, the CNN iOS app is so bad, I took the unprecedented steps of deleting it and reinstalling it again just so I could delete it again. I've downloaded the app. I don't think it's that bad, but it still makes me chuckle. And it seems we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot because 72% of users say apps from businesses simply aren't worth downloading. And that same percentage, 71 point something, says business websites don't even work well on mobile, so why bother anyways? Do make it vertically responsive. We've been hyper-focused as an industry on horizontal responsiveness, but what about vertical? My MacBook Air has a screen height of 768 pixels, same height as iPad in landscape mode. And we were working on planning a hack week. There's just 3 of us full-time at Authentic Jobs, and Adam sent me this link. We were chatting in Skype, I think, and said, hey, check out this from Oak. Adam actually used to work at Oak. They crank out some awesome stuff. Love what they do. He sent me this link. I was on my MacBook Air, and I pulled it up, and I'm like, well, this is great. A photo of Los Angeles and a title. Well, little did I know that there was an entire blog post with mounds and mounds of text and photos and everything else beneath that I couldn't see, because on my MacBook, that was the extent of my experience. Now, to correct this, it might have been easy to just, if we were thinking about this idea, to maybe put some sort of indicator for when they hit a page where they can't see more down the page or something to that extent. Gmail does a great job of this. As you resize the viewport height, the row heights change to allow you to see more of that. And when you get into Google Docs, or I guess Google Drive now, as it's called, you can toggle this header that you'll see here in a second. You can turn that on and off, again, to remove some of that Chrome such that you have a greater space to be able to work and do your thing. Articles have been written about this. Here's one by Trent Walton about vertical media queries. I was researching for this presentation. I came across this article by DEG. It was a case study about responsive design in emails, and something interesting happened as I started reading through this. They have this fixed header, and so as you start scrolling down the page, that header stays static. And so if you take the browser Chrome, you take their header, 34% of my screen is locked up by stuff that has nothing to do with me reading. Now, I gave this presentation a little while ago. They heard about it. I got a tweet from them saying, hey, we're aware of that. We're resolving the issue. This was about back in April, I think, of this year. 6 months ago or something like that. They still haven't fixed it, to their credit. It's hard to get around to stuff like this, but that leads me into this next point about not fixing things. Do use data to present a compelling argument to stakeholders. I am learning in my almost 15 years of designing for the web that with upper management, stakeholders, and clients, generally 3 things have to happen, or one of 3 things has to happen in order for changes to be made. Number 1 is someone has to be annoyed enough that they take action. Number 2, they have to feel threatened enough, either by competitors or their own position or something like that, to take action. Or 3, they have to be excited enough by something. And in my experience, data can help make this happen. If you can present data to your stakeholders and to your customer or your clients and things like that, and in some way, gently, it excites them, it might make them be really annoyed, it might let them know that the business is threatened, sometimes changes do happen. And sometimes that's the only way. Obviously, they're not annoyed enough. The DEG, whatever they do for business, they're not either annoyed enough, excited enough, or threatened enough to make that correction. And I'm to blame as well. With Authentic Jobs, there are things today on the site that I know absolutely stink, but I just have not gotten excited enough or threatened enough or annoyed enough to go fix them. And we have to juggle all of these things. Now, I shared the Zappos example. I was speaking at, talking about this and talking about the Zappos idea and how I wish they persisted the cart and so forth. And I got done with my presentation. I go down, and 3 guys from the web team at Zappos come up and introduce themselves to me. I'm like, oh, great. And what they said to me was, we know it's a problem. We have been trying to convince upper management that this is a problem and it needs to be fixed, but we've not been able to do it. And I think it goes back to what I just said, that upper management is not yet excited enough, annoyed enough, or threatened enough to make this change. And what I told them was this. I said, you go back and let them know that they have missed out on revenue from me because they're not making this happen. Literally, again, I'm spending $20,000 a year on Amazon. I don't spend that much on shoes, not anywhere close to it. But I can't have that same experience of just casually browsing in my bed at night or something like that and then making a purchase the next day, or vice versa, because it doesn't exist. I have to physically work to go find those shoes again, add them to my cart, and so forth. We're kind of out of time. I know we started a little bit late, but I want to respect everybody's time. There's other do's and don'ts we can talk about. Maybe what I'll do is just quickly skim over some of these. This idea of, let's see how I can shorten this, how I can get to the point. I'm a little concerned as an industry that we're thinking a one-size-fits-all approach is okay. And I think a lot of it has to do with responsive design, to be specific. Don't get me wrong. There are so many incredible things right about responsive design. And I love that we're talking about it. I remember the days of doing tables and the painful switch to CSS, and yet it was such a good thing to make that switch. And we're in that same period where we're switching to responsive designs. And I don't know about you, but back then we didn't tell management and our customers that we were shifting to CSS. We simply did it because that was the new way we were going to build websites. We've heard a lot of discussion. I've heard a lot of discussions about, oh, we've got to sell clients on responsive web design and so on. No, you don't. Not always. You can simply just say, this is how we now build websites. End of story. And that's exactly the shift we made with CSS, and I think we can make that same shift now, and I think a lot of us have. But at the same time, I think we're relying a bit too much. No, okay, hold on. Before I bring the smack down on that, another example of how we're doing this right. So Electric Pulp, one of their clients is O'Neill Clothing. They converted the site to a responsive design and had some enormous gains in conversions, transactions, and revenue, literally overnight by doing that. So again, please don't take my remarks as saying responsive design is wrong or things like that. I just want to ask the question, are we putting too much emphasis on that? Because this is the rally cry that we've been shouting over the past couple of years, that it's a must. But in many cases, it's a must only for the browser. What about native apps? How in the world have native apps escaped the same scrutiny as the browser? So this is Marco Arment, who developed Instapaper, who says, my next app won't rotate. Sorry, done deal. I really hate dealing with rotation. How is it okay to say this kind of thing with apps, but we cannot? I mean, we would be burned at the stake if we say this kind of thing when it comes to responsive design in the browser. Is it a double standard? Is it okay to develop per device and even per screen when it comes to apps, but not okay with the browser? I think we can do more to recognize that the totality of a cross-screen experience may include responsive web design, but the pie is not nearly as big as this sometimes as we think it to be. It might be smaller, something along those lines. In fact, I don't have the paper with me. I don't have the context, so I intentionally did not put a screen up here because I don't want you to take these stats out of context. But the president of ComScore was speaking at an event. ComScore tracks a lot of analytical data for our industry, and they produce these general statistics, which are both good and bad, admittedly, about browser usage and about consuming patterns and all of these things. And in this talk, and again, I don't have the full context of it, but in this talk said that from their data, based on their data, about 85% of users, if I remember the numbers correctly, 85% of users prefer a native app, if one exists, over web. Meaning 15% of people would say, I'd take a mobile web experience over a native app experience. In my experience, that's definitely the case. I will go sometimes 3 days without opening a browser on my tablet or my phone. But I will consume data through the web from many sources, many times a day, just not through the browser, but through native apps, through Twitter, through Flipboard, and things like that. And so I'm a little concerned that we are arguing over a smaller piece of the pie and not looking at the entire piece of cross-screen experiences when we talk about responsive design so heavily and say that we've got to be doing this, blah, blah, blah. Yes, you do, but you need to be looking at the entire experience. So people like Cameron who want to pay Zappos more money can do that if they would look at the experience across the board, their apps, their browser instances, and so forth. Okay, so we are, again, out of respect for time, we're pretty much out of time. Let me just see if there's anything else I need to toss in there, and then we'll take a few questions. Are your butts hurting yet from those hard metal chairs? We're just going to wrap up here. Oh, we need to say this. Okay, we'll wrap up with this. So, not Microsoft. I'll show you the next slide. So, Charlie, what's his name? Charlie Rose was interviewing John Donahoe, the CEO of eBay, talking about this very thing. And John Donahoe was arguing about how important mobile and non-desktop stuff is becoming to their business. And there was one part in this interview. It's a great interview. You can find it online. Just do a Google search for those two names. He stops Charlie and he says, hey, Charlie, look, people are buying 8,000 cars a week with eBay's mobile app. Does that map anywhere close to what we think smartphone experiences typically are? That they're quick, short bursts, blah, blah, blah. how in the world do you buy a car through an app and argue that that's a short burst, just need info, and so on and so forth? And he said this. He says, we understood mobile, later in the interview, he says, we understood mobile just to be another screen. Donahoe became CEO in 2008. They've seen a 75% increase in share price since he took over. I think he really gets it. I think you and I can too if we think in those terms of screens, not just device silos, not stereotypical user scenarios, and so on and so forth. Last thing I'll say is a plug for what we do through Authentic Jobs every year. And I'll close on this. And that is we run a campaign every September. Our anniversary month is in September. And we extend it through the end of the year. And we run it with Charity Water, who's also right here in New York City. How many of you have heard of Charity Water? Yeah, so maybe you've heard of this, but we run a campaign every year to raise funds for Charity Water to celebrate our birthday. We kind of do the reverse of what you might do for a typical birthday, right, where you get presents. Well, we turn around and give out things. So I have shirts like this. I've got 3 shirts here. In fact, I'm going to give away tonight. But we also encourage our community to give to Charity Water. And we are on the cusp of breaking $100,000 that we've raised for Charity Water over the past 4 campaigns. And so the plug I'm putting in is if you will consider helping with that. If you can go to that address, authenticjobs.com/8. There's still time to enter to win a couple great prizes that we have that we're just giving out basically. But more importantly, if you'll take a look at Charity Water and what they're doing and consider donating, even $1 went to Charity Water with Ethiopia last year. And it was a tremendous experience. $1 US dollar in Ethiopian birr, which is their currency, is about 17 birr. That's the equivalent of about 2 meals, 2 small meals a day. And so even though that money goes to water, think of it in terms of if you contribute even $1 to Charity Water, you're helping basically fund 2 meals for a little child, more importantly, to get them water. And so that's just, again, a simple plug for considering helping us fund that campaign. And that, I think we'll stop there. Thank you. That's all I've got. I know we probably don't have a lot of time for questions. So I've got 3 T-shirts here. Do we have any, I have a ladies small. Anybody in a ladies small size up here in the front? There we go. I've got a men's large size. Anybody have men's large? Okay, here we go. And then nice catch. Oh, I have 2 women's shirts. That's awesome. I have more women's shirts than men's. This is a medium? Okay, good luck. There we go. That's awesome. Okay, thank you.
We've got mics for questions.
Oh, do we have any questions? I know we've been here for quite a while, so I want to respect your time, but go for it.
You talked about responsive design in terms of screen real estate, but there's multiple input devices across different devices, whether it's mouse or voice or touch. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that, or if you had any thoughts on that.
About responsive design working with things like voice commands?
Or different input devices. So whether, like some websites have hover states, which doesn't work with touch very well. Some have right click if you have a mouse, or if you're doing touch, you interact in a completely different way, for example.
And how responsive design can and cannot help with that? That's a hard one to answer because I think we're together trying to figure that out, right? I think it goes back to that thing I mentioned earlier where we've been accustomed to talking about clicking and then talking about tapping, and now we're getting into this space where we don't know what they're doing in some cases. And so to be able to talk about voice commands, to be able to talk about a hover state even, something as simple as that, it's difficult to understand how to do that. I remember when I was writing this book, they had something called Wurfel, which you had to use basically to sniff a device's capabilities, to figure out screen resolution, to figure out input types, and so on and so forth. And it was an absolute mess. And what we've seen is a bit of a repeat of that, where I've seen over the past year, for example, some resources that are a media query snippet library, where it has a whole range of devices, and they give you the snippets for detecting those devices, or at least catering to those devices. And at the outset, we think, well, that's great. I can go copy and paste and throw that into my document. But I'm concerned that that's a repeat of what we saw 6 years ago when I was writing this book, and that is we're fragmenting experiences across the board, even though we're trying to detect things like voice capabilities and touch and hover and things like that. I don't know what the right answer to that question is. I know I've not answered your question sufficiently. Does anyone want to take a better stab at answering that question? Because I think that's a very important question to be asking. And I don't know the details of how we're figuring that all out. I think the onus is on us to be thinking about it, though, and to be working through that. Nobody's going to take a stab at it? Okay, we're going to have to leave it unanswered. Other questions? Up here in the front, we'll go to the back.
So you mentioned this sort of eBay thing and how many cars are being sold. Yeah. I mean, is there the corollary of how many car auctions are being created on mobile devices? I mean, do you create that barrier, that friction for someone because it's hard, and suggest you go to your home computer, or do you try and make an app that lets them, even though it's 1% is going to create that car auction?
Yeah, I would be willing to bet, John didn't say in an interview, if I remember, I'd be willing to bet you could easily create an auction from your phone, especially with how easy it is to snap photos of something and then just upload it and so on and so forth. So is that feasible?
But I guess, I mean, when you're thinking about like that specific car auction, that's thousands of dollars.
When you, meaning the user, or you, the person planning for that experience?
So I'm the seller.
Okay.
Is, designing the experience for me, I mean, I think about anything else where there's a seller versus a buyer.
Yeah.
The buyer suspends the disbelief if it's not money anymore. It's just, it's a quick button that says buy now. But the seller wants to take extra time.
Perfect photos and
I mean, they're asking for a bunch of money. I mean, how do you, look at define that experience? Is there a seller app and a regular app, or you try and fit everything into all the same?
Oh, that's a great question. I can't answer that for eBay, of course. I don't know how they've done that, but I would kind of flip that question around and say, why would you not make it feasible and very easy for someone as a seller to be able to list a car? And again, I bet they've probably done that.
Will you get the most money? Like, look at eBay. You're trying to sell something that's $500.
I have no idea. I've sold a lot of stuff on eBay, and I've done both, where I take very nice photos with my Canon SLR, DSLR, and then photos with my iPhone. And I wouldn't say there's a big difference between the two of them. Again, I think it comes back to the idea of conversions, especially when the phone in my pocket is beginning to rival the camera that I might have to take really awesome photos. And so I think we're seeing those two come together. But I like the question you're asking, because those are the kinds of questions we need to be asking. This whole idea of convergence and cross-screen and so forth has to begin at the tables where we sit down and talk about what is the experience like when you come to eBay or when you come to Authentic Jobs or things like that, such that we don't make the mistake like we made saying, oh, well, people on tablet want to be able to locate themselves really fast, but they won't do that on desktop. We need to remove those kinds of misnomers and incorrect labels from our discussions. Back in the back.
I was wondering if you had thoughts about any patterns around discoverability. So as we take time to build out these great experiences for different size screens and input devices and stuff, how do users know that those are there? I run into cases all the time where people are like, I didn't know I could do that on my phone. I don't know if you see anything about how do we communicate that to users.
So you spend all this time creating this awesome feature. Maybe you could define it as being a cross-screen thing, and yet your users can't even find it. How do you expose that more? How do you present that in the app? I think that's a problem all of us face, right? You only have so much screen real estate space to begin with. Especially with apps, it's easy to bury something in that, what we call the hamburger icon, right? Just dump a ton of stuff in there. Some people call it the trash bin or something like that, because you just kind of throw everything in there and hope that users find it. I think a lot of it, well, part of it has to do with priorities, right? Understanding what the priorities are for users. And I think there has to be a discussion around priorities for the business. So, for example, we do things with Charity Water every year, and we spend a lot of money trying to create promotions and expose our users to that and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we have to be a profitable, successful company. And to an extent, we still have to push our brand in ways that we know are going to return revenue. And so I think part of those discussions have to be, yes, about the users, what they need, and exposing things that are important and so on and so forth. I think the other half has to be around, we have to stay in business as a company, or we can't provide that app. We can't provide those experiences and things like that. But as far as how do we make specific things more discoverable, more accessible, I don't know. I think those are discussions specific to your experience, specific to your app, specific to your website, what users need, and what the business needs to stay in business, basically. What part of your question did I not answer?
Well, I think that I guess what I was hoping for, and maybe a pipe dream, but when we were embracing as a web community, we were embracing RSS. We came up with this orange RSS button that let people know.
Well, you came up with what? The RSS?
There's this, we have the little orange RSS button that was everywhere for a
Okay.
while,
Yeah.
right? And that let people know, hey, this site is on board. You can subscribe or add us in your reader or whatever. I wonder if there's some similar things that users can learn across different sites and apps that can let them know.
Expose a thing
they
or
can extend this experience to your sequential point, on their phone or on their tablet.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there's a universal language that we've come up with to say those kinds of things. Maybe one's needed, maybe not. I don't know the answer to that question. I think we have to do a better job, though, of assuming that people want to do those kinds of things. And if we make those assumptions and design around those assumptions, then I think the need for that kind of language goes away, because we don't have to say elsewhere. We just expect that users will probably do that. And sure, we can do marketing promotions and things like that to expose app or things like that. But I think we need to begin by assuming that people are going to do that in the first place, and then see what that leads to. Great discussion. I wish we could talk about that one too, because that's a great question to be asking. How about we ask maybe one or two more questions, and we'll wrap up. Any other questions? Unless we don't have any. Up here in the front.
You spoke about 85% of users would choose a native app over a mobile website. But I guess there's also the first step of getting that user to download an app, right? There's a huge barrier there. Can you speak about your experience with that?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, so I'm going to read you something from my book. It's from 6 years ago. But I think it still applies, believe it or not. Here's what I said. The success of the web, actually, before I read this, restate your question so I make sure I answer it at the end.
I mean, if you had an app and a website, you'd probably 85% of the time go to the app first.
Okay, yep.
But even when you were looking at dictionary.com, you weren't incentivized to go download that app. You just kept clicking out of it.
Yep.
Like, what is the barrier of getting that app, the experience that someone would prefer, is for them to download it or for them to get it and for them to feel like it's important for them to, I guess, choose that app.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I don't know if I can answer that question fully. I'm going to do my best in maybe two ways. Here's the first way. I'm going to read from my book. Here's what I say. The success of the web as we know it today is largely due to one piece of software, the browser. I can access nearly any website, any application, or any form of content with that one browser. To assume users will be satisfied downloading a smart client, now remember we called them smart clients back then, they're called apps today, assuming that a user would be content to download a smart client for every site they frequent is to assume that users have adequate storage space on their devices and that they're willing to pay the costs, both data and time, to download these content provider applications. For every argument against the browser, there's likely a case study demonstrating devices and networks specific to a content provider or to a website or app are rarely successful. In all likelihood, most users will probably download a smart client or app for a few of their favorite content providers, but beyond that, a browser will be or should be sufficient for interacting with web content. And that's still, believe it or not, very much my belief today, that we need to build phenomenal experiences that work well in the browser. I think the problem we're facing today is Twitter.com does not work anywhere close to as well in a browser for me on my phone as it does through an app. It feels very laggy. It feels like it's broken. And so I resort to using the Twitter app because it feels very quick. It feels snappy. And I think that's not so much a part of our responsibility as it is the device manufacturers, the browser manufacturers, so to speak. And so I think we're all in this boat together where we, the designers and developers, want to create great mobile web experiences, but people like myself are not using them because the devices and the browsers aren't there yet. They just don't provide an experience that is capable of doing that. I didn't show this example. I had it in there, but I had to skip over it. I think Pinterest does a great job of subtly encouraging people to download their app. They've got a great app. And if you go to their website, it will, if you go on a tablet or a phone, it will show at the top a bar that says, please consider downloading our app, and it has a link to the App Store and things like that. But they're very sensitive about how they do that. If you click close, it's almost impossible to ever see that again. Unlike dictionary.com, if you click no thanks, go away, it will come back. I guarantee you. I've seen it do that. In fact, we took a screenshot of the Pinterest through a browser, and it had that strip across the top, and I had already deleted it from, or closed it, that is, from my device, and Adam had closed it from his. We had to go through quite a few steps to erase our cookies to get that to come back up. And that's how good they were at making sure that they don't annoy their users again with that kind of thing being pushed in their face. So I don't know, it's very difficult right now where I think we need to be considering apps and pushing that on our users because the experience can be so much better there. I think we recognize that not everyone wants to do that. And sometimes, like the Zappos one, where you have to look at this thing before you can get to your card versus Pinterest up there at the top. Hey, by the way, if you want to download this, there's a link. Go for it, but we're not going to get in your way of doing what you came to do in the first place. What part of your question did I not answer?
I guess it's more just like the bubble you drew was like, people on their devices, and then it was native apps, and then within that, there was a smaller group of like responsive mobile web. But it sounds like, there is like a bigger barrier to get people to even get the app.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I don't know if I can do justice to answer that question because I think it's specific to your audience and the circumstances that you're dealing with. Some of the best advice I ever received years ago was back when we were, you remember those discussions about, do we drop IE6? Do we design for 1024 or back then it was 800 by 600? And all these things would come out with these general statistics from Alexa, if you remember Alexa back then. Well, these are way back in the day. How Alexa would aggregate all their data and say, oh, these many people have this resolution of their display, and these many people are using this browser. And we would make the mistake of saying, oh, because 76% of all users are at 800 by 600, I have to design for that experience. Some really smart people, like Jeremy Keith and some others, said ignore what the general stats say and look only at your stats. And if your stats say that 90% of your users are on IE6 or whatever it might be, you need to design and develop for that experience, as well as pushing them along to download newer browsers, to download apps, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the best things we can do as teams is to look at exactly what's happening with our data. And those bubbles were intentionally drawn vague because there is no bubble that could define all of us in this room. We need to define our own bubbles and figure out what our users need, what they're doing today, where we want them to be in terms of where we see the market going, where we need to be as a business, and so on and so forth. Great question. I think that's it. We'll go ahead and wrap up there. Thank you again. Oh, by the way, if you'd like to see this up close, I have a proofing copy. It has only half of the bridge, but I'll leave it up here if you'd like to take a look at what that looks like.